Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome into a special Thursday edition and a Thursday afternoon edition at that, folks, as we had to push off last night's show because of the Eastern Conference Finals Game 5 down in Miami. Now, because the Bruins are done with their playoff schedule, there is not a playoff game every single day of the week. That was what was making it hard. That's why I did it the last time we had a show, is because the Bruins and Celtics were still playing. Well, actually that Wednesday night that worked out. Or last week the Celtics didn't have one on Wednesday night. But you catch the drift. This was the time of year where it was, well, there's a playoff game every night, so it was kind of hard for us to put on a show and avoid a playoff game. But nonetheless, unfortunately, from the Bruins standpoint, they're no longer playing, so it made it easy to push it off to this afternoon, and I'm on vacation this week, so it was easy enough to put the show on this afternoon for you. So without further ado, we will definitely dive into the Boston sports scene as far as the Celtics, as they are one win away from moving on in the NBA final to the NBA finals. And of course, the Boston Red Sox, who are red hot and tearing it up offensively, had their 6-game win streak snapped last night. So there's plenty to talk about here, and even a little bit of Patriots news here as they have started mini camp here at the end of May. But it definitely full. And of course, as you know, last week I went to the Red Sox on Saturday, and hopefully you followed along on any of my socials and you saw any of the photos and the live stream, the short little live stream I did from my seats at the game. It was a pretty fun game. They ended up coming back down 5-0, and it was a Garrett Whitlock start too, so I was kind of excited, but he ended up getting knocked around there in the first inning, gave up the 4 runs, but the Red Sox did come back and won 6-5. It was one of the more entertaining games that I have personally been to at Fenway. So it was pretty fun. And we're getting into basically the start of summer here as we get towards Memorial Day. So it's been beautiful weather outside, great for baseball, and obviously great for sitting around watching the Celtics if you have the ability to watch it outside, like I know some people have. So it is just a beautiful time of year if you're a sports fan or if you just like to be outside as well. But we will dive right into the out of the box segment, as we always do, to kick off the show. Still no sponsors. Maybe let's see if I can get that 47 brand. Maybe if 47 brand wants to start sponsoring this, I would love that, as I picked up the new, can't see it now, maybe one of these shows I'll flip it around, but I got the Fenway Park Special Edition Red Sox trucker hat, which I do this time of year when it's kind of hot outside. I do like to wear a snapback. So maybe one of these days 47 brand will reach out and they will sponsor maybe the out of the box segment or some segment of the show. We'll find out. Keep tuned. But without further ado, as we mentioned, the Boston Celtics, as we last left you off, believe last week the series was tied at 1 apiece. I believe it was last Wednesday, if I remember correctly, or they might have actually, nope, my apologies. They had only played one game by this time last week. So as we look at things now where it stands, they've played 4 more games in this series, excuse me, as Boston has now taken a 3-2 lead in this best of 7 series, as they have a chance to close it out tomorrow night in the Garden at home and avoid a game 7 where just about anything can happen. But the Celtics are on the brink of advancing to what would be their 22nd appearance in the NBA Finals, which that is just nuts, thinking that there's only been 75 NBA Finals, or there's been 75 NBA seasons, which would obviously include 7, which will be 75 NBA Finals when we get there. And the Celtics have been in nearly half. Or, well, not nearly half, but probably 40%, 35%, whatever the math is. But you catch the drift. There's 70, I was thinking 50 for a moment, but there's been 75 finals. So you're talking about just about a third of the NBA finals, which is nuts. Nuts. Wow. That's crazy. That's in Yankees and Montreal Canadiens and New England Patriots territory as far as the amount of Super Bowls and Stanley Cup and World Series appearances. So, but obviously, don't want to put the cart before the horse here, as we'll dive into these last couple of games here with the Celtics, especially last night's game. But again, they took a 3-2 series lead last night, beating the Heat 93 to, I believe it was 80 was the final score. And then as we mentioned, the Boston Red Sox had a 6-game win streak going for them. And of course, they've won 4 of their last series in a row. So they've started to make up a lot of ground. As just think about it, a couple weeks ago, they were 10-19. And they did lose they ended up having their 6-game win streak snap last night, but still they made up a lot of ground. Now they're only 3 games under 500. So they've made up a lot of ground here over this last couple weeks. So, and of course, with the very soft, I know, again, you don't want to underestimate these series. Is obviously they do have a 5-game set against the Orioles, and they play the Oakland A's. They have a bunch of, and the Cincinnati Reds. So they have and they have to go out and play Seattle again, which we know they just pounced on Seattle in that 4-game set at home. But again, there's a soft part of the schedule, at least as it appears. And I know the Red Sox did lose 2 out of 3 to the Orioles, but that was back when their offense was just putrid. But now their bats have woken up. And speaking of that, over this 6-game winning streak, Trevor Story has absolutely annihilated the baseball. You look at his season-long average, you're like, oh, it's only 229. But remember, he was below 200. He was in the low 190s. He's absolutely been on a tear at one point during this stretch. I think he was at 234, 235. So he was absolutely raised his batting average by 40 points. But obviously what they paid him for was to be a power hitting, run producing second baseman that plays defense. And he's done all of that. He went from no home runs and then got off the schneid in Atlanta, hit that one bomb. And then now it's just been absolute on a tear for Trevor Story, as he has hit 8 home runs. He's actually leading the Red Sox in RBIs with 33, which is obviously surprising with how hot Rafael Devers and JD Martinez and Xander Bogaerts, not as much as those 3, but he's been pretty good as well. So with those 4, obviously those other 3, Bogaerts, Devers, and Martinez, you'd think at this point, with how steady they've been and how good they've been to start the year, that they would have been leading the team. But Trevor Story has absolutely been on fire, and he's finally lived up to all the hype and, of course, silencing some of those doubters. So the Red Sox have started to climb back into things here, and they're getting close to that 500 mark, which seemed like it might have been a really hard uphill battle, but they've made a really good go of it, and they've really surprised a lot of people here. And it seems like at this point, especially with the soft part of the schedule coming up, that they might be in that playoff race, at least for those 3 or 4 wild card spots. Maybe not the division, but those 3 wild card spots are definitely going to be in play for the Red Sox as we move down here. At least that's how it appears, and it's not going to be a wasted summer. But without further ado, we will jump right into it here, folks, as we get ready to break down the Boston Celtics. Now, the Boston Celtics, as we mentioned last week, they had only played the 1 game before the podcast. They had lost the opener to the Miami Heat down in Miami. And since then, it's been a back and forth series. It really hasn't been all that pretty. It hasn't been a aesthetically pleasing Eastern Conference Finals, if you want to put it that way. Obviously, if you're a Celtics fan, a la myself and anybody else out there, you're happy with the result so far because you're up 3-2 in the series. Not going to complain about that at all. obviously, this is what you wanted. You wanted to be up in the series. You wanted a chance to close things out at the Garden. But just from a pure entertainment factor, there has been wildly up and down. It's been crazy. It's been kind of like the weather around here lately. You have a day where it's 90, 93, 97 degrees or 80 in the high 80s. And then the next day it's 61, 50 or 59 degrees. Like the other day when my men's league game, which this is partially another reason why the podcast got pushed up to 2:30 because I have a game tonight. So I had to do this afternoon. But nonetheless, the Celtics and Heat series. It's just been up and down as far as you get one night where the Heat will just absolutely punch the Celtics in the face. And then the Celtics will come back with a haymaker of their own, a la game 2 of that series, where they just absolutely blew out the Heat. They won by 30 down in Miami. And then, of course, the next night, not the next night, but the next game of that last Saturday in Boston, the first game back, you thought the Celtics would have some home court advantage, all the fans getting pumped up and jacked to be there. And the Heat outscored them 39-18 in that first quarter. It was just a bloodbath in the first half. The Celtics did kind of make a comeback towards the end of the half, though. They were down by 15, and at one point in the third quarter, towards the end, they cut it to 1-point lead, and they ended up losing by, 15-13 at the end of that. So it still ended up being a blowout win for the Heat in that game. And then, of course, game 4, the Celtics came back on home court. Then they threw another haymaker themselves. They won by 20. And then, of course, last night was just an ugly, basically a rock fight at that point. It was not pretty at all. Neither one of the teams last night were shooting great at all. In the 3-point percentages were awful. The Heat were like down to 13 or 18% behind the arc. And then the Celtics were like at 27% at one point. I think they finished like in the low 30s, 31, 32% after the night, because they were able to jack up some threes towards the end of this. But the Celtics did finally, after the half, come back out and put together some good offensive series there, as far as, yes, Jason Tatum didn't have his A game last night shooting the ball, but he was able to impact the game with his playmaking ability. He was out there, and I believe he finished with double digits in assists, and he was really finding guys. He found Derek White on a nice one bounce pass in the first half. And just numerous times he would find guys like Marcus Smart, Al Horford, Grant Williams. He would find them in the corner for a 3, or find them in the paint to get them an easy bucket, or lob it up to Rob Williams. So, yes, he didn't have his best game last night, but he was there and he impacted the game in another way that you were hoping for, that what would happen in game 3, where he really didn't show up as far as on the offensive side of the ball. So that's been, we'll get to Jaylen Brown here in a moment, but the one thing with Jason Tatum over this series has just been really seeing the old Jason Tatum. And when I say that, I'm saying the pre-Ime Udoka Jason Tatum, because since Udoka has been here, he's really turned both Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum into dynamic playmakers. Now, obviously, Tatum to a whole nother level, because one thing we did not mention in the out of the box segment was that Jason Tatum did get named to the All NBA first team, which was not surprising. I thought he would make probably the second team, just because he kind of came on later in the year, but he did that second half push that he had pushed him into that first team which I figured probably next year it was going to be his first NBA first all team appearance, but he got it a year early, at least from what I thought would happen, and I'm definitely not complaining. So he got his first first team all NBA appearance. So obviously, Udoka has pushed him into that stratosphere, helped him with not obviously the shooting was always there. Shooting has always been there. He's always been that 26 points a game. I think his career is 24 and a half or 25, somewhere in there. So he's always been a high volume, high percentage shooter. He's been a great offensive shooting wing, but it's always been trying to push him into the playmaker category of, all right, you're a star shooter, but can you be that all-around superstar and make everybody else around you better? And that's exactly what's happened this year. And then, of course, with Jaylen Brown, he's also, to a little bit of a lesser extent, been pushed into that category, as well as he's also made his teammates better. And he's been that, and he's also been that second guy that Tatum can rely on. So they've really, which to start the season, everybody had their opinions on if either one of the two should have been traded. I always thought it was crazy, at least on the Jason Tatum end, that if you ever wanted him traded, you were just nuts and out of your mind. But Jaylen Brown was the one that if you could have, people talked about a Damian Lillard or a Bradley Beal trade. Obviously, now that just seems like a dumb decision at this point, because they've coalesced so well together at this point that you wouldn't want to break that up between Tatum and Brown. So the point being here is with Udoka, he's really brought them into that next level, and we've seen it throughout this playoff run. And of course, as we mentioned, Tatum's been a little up and down as far as that was the one surprising thing. Is I thought this is where we'd see more of the next step for Jason Tatum, because we've seen him have those 50-point games. We saw it last year against the Brooklyn Nets. But what I was looking for Tatum this year, which I haven't seen it as much, although last night might be that next step in the direction, not maybe a full step, maybe a half a step in that direction, quarter of a step, whatever you want to put it on. But the point being is that I thought that we'd see maybe that full step forward as far as him being, well, if you don't get 50 or 40 points or 35 a night in the playoffs, you get in that 22, 24 points a night, but then you also have 8 to 10 assists, and you get 5, 6 rebounds. You become that playmaker that we saw all throughout that second half of this season, of the regular season, which, I mean, that's been there, but it's been off and on. He'll have one really good game, then he'll have a clunker, come back, have another really good game, another solid game. But I just thought maybe we'd see a little bit leveling out in a good way, as far as you're not going to have such of a drastic time where, what was that Milwaukee series where he had a 10-point game, and then he had another low scoring game here in this Miami Heat series, this Eastern Conference series against the Heat. So I just thought it was a little not disappointing, but, well, I guess disappointing would be the right word for Tatum, not to kind of see him be as consistent. But again, last night I think was like a half a step in the right direction. He still had the first half was just bad shooting. He started to heat up. He finished with 22. So he did kind of finish in that area. And like I said, the playmaking was there last night. So that was good to see for Jason Tatum in Game 6. So maybe moving forward, maybe we will see a little bit more consistency, which would be good. And then, of course, with looking over at the other star on this team and Jaylen Brown, looking specifically at last night, man, that first half was bad as far as his ball handling. Now, I know he came in out of the draft. He wasn't known for the ball handling. He was more going to be that athlete. Maybe he could develop into a catch and shoot type of shooter. And although obviously he was just more athletic, and you'd use his skills to kind of bruise into the basket as a power forward, maybe possibly power wing, if you want to look at it that way. And he's definitely done that kind of power wing, power forward type of thing so far in his career. He's definitely done that. We saw it last night on that vicious dunk in the fourth quarter, which was awesome. But to me, just he has improved his shooting. He's become a pretty decent 3-point shooter. Nothing to really write home about, but he'll get his games where he gets hot from behind the arc. And then he's worked on his mid-range jumpers as well. He's turned himself into a pretty good shooter. He's gotten into that all-star level. He's not all NBA yet, but he's definitely in that all-star category. A nice Robin to Jason Tatum's Batman, if you want to put it that way. But last night, though, it just looks like a high schooler out there having time troubling to dribble. It just amazes me that he's such a high level NBA player. He's an all-star level player, but he just has such a trouble dribbling and handling that ball at times where I think what did he have last night? He have like 6 turnovers in that first half. There were times where when Tatum or Smart or Derek White would pass the ball over to Jaylen Brown, that you just hold on to that ball like it's like your life depends on it. And of course, what we do, he turn it over. Now, this didn't cost the Celtics like it has earlier in this series, where game 1, the Celtics, what did they have? 15, 16 turnovers in that game, and a lot of them were from Tatum and Brown. And Tatum, to an extent, has kind of toned it down a little bit. The game, what was it, 3? He had a lot of turnovers as well. But Jaylen Brown last night kind of reverted back to earlier in this series where he was just turning the ball over left and right. And I was just screaming at the TV, some not safe for work language. Just what the hell are you doing out there? You got to hold on to that ball. And probably they would have pulled away earlier in that game. Excuse me, before they did there in the second half, if Brown just holds on to the ball and maybe he only has 2 turnovers. Now, of course, like I said, it wasn't pretty in that first half. Tatum was 1 for 7, 1 for 9 in the first half. Got the 1-3. Jaylen Brown was turning the ball over. The only person offense, 2 people that showed up offensively were Al Horford and Derek White. And of course, you had Robert Williams sprinkled in there as well, because he's more of the lob it up to him. You got a couple free throws in there. But really, it was pretty much Derek White and Al Horford kept you in that game, because for a while there, it was looking like 1992 basketball instead of 2022 basketball out there. At the half, what was it, 43 to 37 was the score. So it's very low scoring half. And like I said, to his credit, Derek White came out like he did in game 4, and played really well. And he was kind of where Derek White had the first 7 points. So he played pretty well. Obviously, he didn't shoot beyond the arc, but what I do like what I've seen from Derek White in this series, when he has decided to kind of put a little bit more offense on his back, has been to drive into the lane, get into that paint, and try to shoot those little 8-foot, 5-foot jumper shots in front of the net, or kind of drive in, lay it up and off, and get some of those easy points. So he's taken advantage of that and given the Celtics a spark, and he ended up finishing the night with 14 points. So he had a pretty solid night, and then actually played probably better than Marcus Smart, who got into foul trouble. So it was a just ugly first half. But again, the Celtics, to keep a theme with the whole series, but again, the Celtics were able to finally finally find something in the second half where Brown was getting some 3-pointers to fall. So wasn't Tatum. And Brown finished the night as the leading scorer with 25 and Tatum with 22. But of course, the kind of unsung thing about this was to have basically your starting five in there, as far as have Brown, Tatum, Al Horford, Robert Williams, and Marcus Smart all out there on the court. Now, of course, Robert Williams has been dealing with the post-knee surgery kind of flail ups when that's kind of acted up on him in this series. So he's had to take a couple games off. But of course, things have kind of straightened out there for him as he's been able to start the last 2 games. It's kind of been a little pain tolerance, what he can deal with. But you can just see his defense out there has been a major, major boost. He was out there blocking shots left and right the last couple games. So that defense. So he and Marcus Smart were kind of in that conversation for Defensive Player of the Year. Now, obviously, we know Marcus Smart won it, very deserving of it, but Robert Williams is just another special defensive player that the Celtics have. So you can just see what he brings to the table when he's there with the Celtics, and when he's healthy or has enough to work with. And it showed last night. And Marcus Smart, not as much last night, but he more impacted game 4. But again, still good to have him out there. You're firing on all cylinders when you have everybody out there. And of course, then if you want to look at another unsung hero, which has kind of been all postseason, has been Al Horford. No longer average Al. He's playoff Al, whatever you want to call him. He's been so fun to watch, even in a game like game 4, where it was pretty much not a no-show offensively, because he obviously made plays, assist, but it was the rebounding, it was the assists, it was the blocks, it was just the leadership that he brought in game 4. So he's just been such a good asset for these Celtics to have out there at all times to lean on. So I've just been so pleased with what he's brought to the Celtics out there from leadership wise. And then of course last night, where at one point he was the Celtics leading scorer with 14 points, but he brought his playoff Al performance last night. So that was so good to see for the Celtics. And of course, the one thing that we never had to worry about in this series was going to be defense, which they brought their A game, except for that first quarter of game 3. The defense has been very good, or at least solid, for most of this series. So they brought it defensively. Now, what has just been perplexing over the last couple of games has just been what's going on with Jimmy Butler. How hurt is he, or does he have an illness, or what's going on with him? Just because there were times where last night he drove into the lane, kind of dribbled out, kicked it out, was taking some ill-advised threes, because even though Butler has scored 27 plus points, 3 times in the series, he had the 41-point game in game 1. He hasn't been the same since game 3. Now, of course, as a Celtics fan, I'm pleased with that, because if he's not out there scoring, then again, it's just not. It's the Heat don't have a lot of firepower, so that obviously you're not rooting for an injury or anything like that. But if he's not out there and he's not effective, then they have to lean on Bam Adebayo, and he was not great last night. He hasn't really been back to that game 3 where he scored the 31 points. And obviously the Heat are without Tyler Hero, who is probably their next best shooter. And now they're kind of leaning on some older veterans, as far as in Kyle Lowry, who was 0 for 24 on his shots that he took, or it was just ridiculous. And then Victor Oladipo's had his moments in the series. Now we got to remember Victor Oladipo was a guy that was scored 20, had a couple just like 3-4 years ago, where he was on the rise, where he was on the come up, where he was in that all-star in the maybe second, third team NBA conversation as far as he was scoring 23 to 24 points per game, averaging that. So this is a guy obviously was a star, and he's just been dealing with a lot of serious injuries over the last couple of years. He hasn't been able to get out onto the court, but he had his moments in the series. But still, they're basically, it's when Jimmy Butler isn't scoring and Adebayo is just no show, then they're screwed, especially without Tyler Hero out there and Duncan Robinson, who we all remember from the 2020 series, just tortured the Celtics. He's had a couple shots here and there, but he really hasn't shown up either. So it's just the Celtic, and you got to give the Celtics defense credit too. Injuries or no injuries, they've just come to play in this series, and it's been a pleasure to watch them. And it's been just amazing to see what they've been able to do to this Miami Heat team, just up and down the court, all the way through this series. It's been amazing. And of course, as we mentioned, Robert Williams has been, when he's been in there and been healthy and been able to play in this series, he's blocked shots. He's showed up, gotten offensive and defensive rebounds. And he's to me, obviously putting Tatum and Brown aside, and I know people want to debate Robert Williams and Marcus Smart when those two were when they were questionable these last couple games. And of course, we didn't have Rob Williams for a few games in this series. Marcus Smart went out with the ankle injury, and we saw how both of that affected the Celtics. But for me, if I had to pick that side, I definitely would have to go with Robert Williams as the more impactful player in this series. Now, if they're lucky enough tomorrow night, which it looks like they might be, and they're able to close out this series and move on to the NBA Finals and face the Warriors, who are up 3-1 in their series. That game 5 is tonight for that series. Then it might switch around where Marcus Smart, seeing as he's a guard, might be a little bit more valuable against Curry and Klay Thompson. But again, that's another story for another day. But again, the Robert Williams is just in this series with Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler. He's just, even at the line, because that 3 that he blocked last night was just picture perfect. Just go look it up, and you'll see just how, just with his long reach and fingertips, he was able to get enough on that shot. And I believe he did that to Gabe Vincent as well. So it's just been amazing just to see what he's been able to do in this series. So if I had to pick it, he's been way more important in this series. You've just seen it when he's been in there. The Heat have no answer for him. This kind of is a reverse of what happened in the bubble in 2020, where the Miami Heat, when they had Bam Adebayo, the Celtics didn't have any answer for it because they were just ragdolling Daniel Tice. And it's kind of been the same when Daniel Tice has shown up in the series, but Ime Udoka is smartened up to it, and he's been like, yeah, I'm going to sit you, Daniel Tice. I'm just going to have a 7-man rotation, basically, at this point. It's just going to be Derek White and Grant Williams. If obviously all my guys are healthy, it's going to be those two kind of subbing in and out. But yeah, when Robert Williams is in there, it's basically been no contest as far as against Adebayo and PJ Tucker and Jimmy Butler. As far as when Robert Williams is in the game, they just have no answer for him. He's just physically more dominating than anybody they have, which obviously it's not the same as what we saw in the Bucks series, because in that Bucks series, even with Robert Williams in there, you have Giannis, who's big, strong, and tall. You had Brook Lopez as a 7-footer. So obviously Milwaukee and Boston were very evenly matched. Now, Boston was not as big as Milwaukee as far as if you measure up to Giannis and Brook Lopez, but still, obviously, physicality wise, I mean, they're still big. They're one of the biggest, most athletic teams in the NBA. It just happens that Milwaukee might be Milwaukee first and Boston second, but that's how you might rank them as far as their height and physicality. But anyways, without getting kind of lost in the weeds there, the point being is that Robert Williams, they just don't have an answer for him defensively. And it was so nice to see him out there making plays. And it's just been a pleasure to watch him in this series going up against Bam Adebayo, and finally the Celtics have an answer for that. And again, you don't want to get too far ahead, but it's looking good as far as going into tomorrow night in Boston. They have a chance to close it out there, but obviously, that the Heat aren't going to give up. Now, obviously, as far as to start the game, they've had a couple of games where they've taken a haymaker, like in the last couple games here, where they've come out pretty good. Like they not game 4, obviously, because they Celtics went up 18-1. But I'm talking about like last night, they came out, they had a decent response. They were leading at the half. You're like, okay, this is finally one of those close games. There really hasn't been one. And of course, the Celtics said, nope. Still going to be another 20-point double-digit win with this one. But the Heat with Eric Spoelstra, probably the best coach in the NBA, although Ime Udoka is nipping at his heels now. But the Heat have come out. They've had an answer for a lot of this series, and I expect them to come out at least trying to throw punches, not literally punches, but mentally get out there, be ready to throw down. I just think at this point, I just think the Heat dealing with injuries to Tyler Hero, and you don't know what's going on with Jimmy Butler. He hasn't looked the same. A lot of these other guys have been rumors about if they've had COVID or not, but some of them, they don't know how funded in truth they are. But nonetheless, it's been a very physical series, and this looks like the Celtics have outlasted them. They've won the war of attrition, at least it looks at this point, because after last night in that second half, it just looked like Miami just was throwing up brick after brick after brick after brick. And if Jimmy Butler doesn't show up, then they really have no offense. And so even when the Celtics have struggled, like we saw last night, they were still able to put up 93 points. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown were able to get their 20-plus points, and you had other role players show up. And Miami just isn't that deep off the bench. And even in their starting 5, they're just not as deep as well. I mean, they are number 1 seed. You got to give them credit. But still, I just think at this point, Boston has outlasted them, out-hustled them at this point. And I just think this is where the injuries and some of the fatigue for Miami and the lack of depth offensively is finally starting to catch up. And this is where I think Boston's going to close this one out tomorrow night in the Garden in advance to the NBA Finals, most likely probably against the Golden State Warriors. But again, still, obviously, can't say enough about how well the Miami Heat have come out and responded at times. So I'm not going to put it past them. So not gonna knock the Heat here. Definitely not gonna. So we'll see how it all rolls here tomorrow night, going back to Boston. But the Celtics again are up 3-2, heading into Game 6 tomorrow night at the Garden, and we will cross our fingers and pray to Lucky the Leprechaun here to see if they can finally make it back to the NBA Finals for the first time since 2010. We'll see what they got in store for us. Now, as we go over across the city to Fenway, to the Red Sox, who, as we mentioned, they were on a streak of their own. As we all know, like I said off the top of the show, we all know the Red Sox started off the season in just dismal fashion. They were 10-19. The offense was a no-show. The bullpen was just awful. I've ranted and raved about Chaim Bloom not putting together a bullpen, and it just looked like this team was going nowhere, and we were going to be stuck all summer without basically a competitive baseball season, where we're going to be, instead of talking about a push towards the playoffs, that we were going to be talking about, oh, are they going to have to trade Xander Bogaerts, or or maybe in that off chance where they're going to have to trade Rafael Devers if they couldn't come to an extension, although they have one more year of contractual control for Devers. And then what are you going to do with JD? What are you going to do with Nathan Eovaldi and all the pending free agents, and where you're going to be basically where you're going to have to sell the farm, so to speak, not the actual farm system, but you know what I mean. Sell all your big pieces on the Red Sox as far as they're trying to restock. But of course, you hate to say it's early, and I've personally said I hate that saying, at least when it comes to baseball, when you start off in a slow slump, because the one thing that I do believe in is you can't win a pennant in April, but you sure as hell can lose it. And that's what it looked like the Red Sox were going to do, because it looked like they were just stuck in neutral. They were kind of just sinking in their own mess. But to their own credit, and to kind of, and even though I don't like the cliche, it was early, and they hadn't even hit the quarter pole of the season yet. So they finally have strung things together. They've won 4 series in a row, looking to pick up their 5th. If they can do it tonight against the White Sox, who they split the series 1-1, and they absolutely clubbed Chicago in the first game of the series, winning 16-3. And when I got done with my men's league game on Tuesday night, everybody looked down at their phone, and we all looked and like, man, they were up 7-0 in like the 3rd or 4th inning already. At that point, they were just bludgeoning Dylan Cease, who's a pretty good pitcher for Chicago, for the White Sox. But the Red Sox, to their own credit, have pulled themselves up off the mat. Yes, they're not 500 yet, but they've done a lot of the yeoman's work here, where I thought maybe by June we'd be looking, maybe like in the first couple weeks of June, you might be 2 games or so away, 2 or 3 games away from being 500, but it's not even the end of May, and they're already to 20 and 23 on the season. Obviously, last night they had a chance to make it, only cut this down to a 1 game below 500. But again, obviously you can't be too greedy, because it's going to be a long season. You can't win every single game. But what I do like, what I've seen from this Red Sox team, is that their fight, they haven't given up, and offensively they have found themselves in a groove. Now we knew all along with Devers, Martinez, and Bogarts, who started out the season playing really well, and they were the only bats that really were there from day one as far as showing up every day. You knew they needed other bats to kind of come in and complement them, mainly Trevor Story, who was your big offseason acquisition. And obviously he's a guy that we know has 30 plus and probably 40 home run power, and is a middle of the order bat that just lengthens out this lineup even more. And you're just waiting for him to wake up, and he finally has. Obviously, he got that 1 home run in Atlanta. He got his first off. Excuse me. He got his first off of his shoulders in Boston, kind of eased him up there. And then when he came back on that homestand against the Astros and then against the Mariners, he just absolutely took off. He had that 3 home run game against Seattle in the first game. And then he had that grand slam the next night. So he had 4 home runs in 2 nights. And then, of course, Rafael Devers hits 2 bombs in the next game, which is the game I went to, which that was a really good comeback. We'll talk about that in a second. But then again, Trevor Story hits another home run, has 5 home runs against the against the Seattle Mariners. And he adds another home run here against the White Sox on Tuesday night. So he's up to 8 home runs already, 33 RBIs. He's hitting like 229 already, which obviously, like I said earlier, when you're down hitting in the high 180s, you're below the Mendoza line at 190 something. When you're this hot, he raised his batting average about 35 40 points already. So he's on fire. And that was the big thing. You were waiting for Trevor Story to finally come around. And that was the point that you had to have. There was really no way around it, no way of avoiding it. You had to have Trevor Story show up. You had to have him here to compete, have him ready to go, because this team was in dire need of lengthening out the lineup, because Kike Hernandez for a long time wasn't doing anything out of the leadoff spot. Now he started to warm up. So you have him showing up as well. He had a first pitch home run in that blowout win against the White Sox in game 1. Alex Verdugo hasn't really started to heat up yet, but he's had a few moments here and there. And then obviously the unsung hero in all of this has been Franchy Cordero, who had the walk-off grand slam in the clinching sweep in that 4-game set on Sunday against the Mariners. He's been the power. He had that home run that night, and then in the game 3 of that set, Franchy Cordero got that triple with 1 down and had that and had the go-ahead run in the 8th inning, sitting there at third, and then Vasquez hits the wall ball. Well, it should have been a double, but the wall ball single that drove in Franchy as he kind of pimped the single. But whatever, they ended up winning that game. But really, they've really gotten contributions pretty much from everybody. Even Jackie Bradley Jr. hit a 3-run home run in that Mariner series. So everybody except for kind of Verdugo and Bobby Dahlback have contributed at some point during this 6-game run, this 3 to 4 series win, because the big one was you got bludgeoned around by the Astros after you took game 1 of that series. And now you were able to come back and win that series against a really good team, against a team that is probably, because I think at some point the Angels are probably going to come back down to earth a little bit, no pun intended, but actually, Houston's already passed them, my apologies, in that division, but Los Angeles has the top wild card spot. But the point being is that it's a team that you played in the American League Championship Series last year, a team that is leading their division right now, and it's one of the better teams in the American League, and you were able to take a series from them. So you finally were able to take a series against a first-place team, and and since then, it's kind of been all downhill in the best way possible for the Red Sox. It's just they finally found their momentum, and of course, the starting pitching has been there, as well as even guys like Michael Walker and Rich Hill. Because even last night, Rich Hill only gave up a 3-run home run. But other than that, it was pretty much the Red Sox just for the one game, they left 12 guys on base, which was the first time in probably 2.5, 3 weeks that the bats really haven't shown up. But other than that, it's really been everybody's shown up, and even guys out of the bullpen. Like you've seen good performances out of Dylan Schreiber, out of Diekman from time to time. And Matt Barnes on that Saturday game came in and closed it out. And for once didn't walk the tightrope, which was nice. And then Hansel Robles did blow the save in that Sunday game where Franchy Cordero did have to come in and hit the walk-off. But again, they were able to sweep the series. So you've gotten even the bullpen, which has been much maligned, has had their moments. Now, obviously, they still have a long way to go. I still don't believe in the bullpen fully at all. They still need a major overhaul in that pen. And now maybe that might be coming from the minor leagues, is because we've heard Josh Winkowski, who most likely is going to be start in that Orioles 5-game set against the Orioles. And then you have Brian Bayo, who is a starter, but maybe at this point, maybe you bring him up in the bullpen just because of the stuff he has. You put him out of the pen. So that they have arms that are down in the system. They have 3-4 good arms at different levels there that look like they're ready to contribute. for the Red Sox. Now, obviously, I'm not going to say they're all going to be aces or no, I'm not saying that, but it's a good sign where everything's starting to kind of fall into place. And you're kind of in the place where I thought they'd be at the beginning of the year, where you have a really good offense that can knock the ball around. You have solid enough starting pitching with Nathan Eovaldi, Nick Pivetta, who's turned his season around after a rough April, is at a really good May. And then you've gotten guys like Whitlock and Houck who flip-flop their roles. They've been able to produce at points, although Whitlock had a tough Saturday. And then, of course, you have a good actually back end, which has been the surprising part, because I did not think anything good would come out of having Walk in the rotation. I didn't like what I saw out of him in Tampa last year, so I was a little kind of iffy what they were going to do. I thought, all right, maybe this is just the back end of the bullpen arm, long guy, but he's actually been pretty good as a starter. And Rich Hill, for the 42 years of age, has pitched pretty good. I mean, albeit yes, he got roughed up in that game against Houston, but even last night against Chicago, he looked pretty solid. He gave up that one over the plate cookie for that 3-run bomb. But other than that, he didn't give up anything else, as it was a 3-1 loss to the White Sox last night. So he pitched pretty solid, kept his team in the game. So again, it's where I thought it would be. You got an okay pitching, gotten solid pitching from your starters, and offense has been starting to slug it here. And it's just been back to where I thought would be. All right, now you have to find an answer in the bullpen, and just kind of have to hold down that bullpen until you get to the trade deadline and see what pieces are out there that you can go trade for. So I finally feel better about where this team is at. Yes, they're still down. They're still below 500, but they're 20-23, so they're only 3 games below. And like I said, you have a really, really soft part of this schedule coming up here for the Red Sox, as they have their final game against Chicago tonight. Then they go home and play starting tomorrow night. They have that 5-game set against Baltimore. Yes, 5 games, because Saturday is a double header against Baltimore. And then they play the Cincinnati Reds for a 2-game set at home, have that Thursday off. And then they go out to the West Coast, play a awful Oakland team. They go to play a 4-game set against the Angels, where that's going to be their tough set right there. And then they play Seattle again, who they handled, and then a 2-game set against Oakland at home. Or sorry, a 3-game set against Oakland at home. So and then even if you want to look a little further, they have a 3-game set starting June 20th against Detroit, sandwiched in between that Oakland and St. Louis series. So you have a pretty decent chunk before you have to start getting back into Toronto, before you have to go back to Toronto, home against Tampa in New York, and you get back into the division again in July. But again, so you're in decent position to kind of get back into the thick of the wild card race. Now, obviously, unless the Yankees just fall apart, as far as, because they're 9.5 games, 10 games now ahead of you in the division. Sorry about that. Some of my neighbors with their trailer going by. So once we redo the room, we'll probably put up some soundproofing in here. Sorry if you heard the clanking of the trailer. But nonetheless, the Red Sox have started to make that climb out of the cellar. Obviously, last night when they lost, they fell back down to 10.5. But really, honestly, that's better than it, because at one point, they were at 14.5, 13.5 behind New York. They picked up even room in the division. They are 3 games behind Toronto for the last wild card spot. So they are still very well within striking distance of that last wild card spot. So obviously we're only still in May. So they've really turned things around. They've picked things up. They got to where I thought they'd be, probably towards the middle of June, a lot faster than I ever thought. So I think we are going to have meaningful baseball here in June. in July, in August, and down the stretch. It's going to be there. We're going to have meaningful baseball because I think this team was offensively was too good to be held down for this long. And of course, you still have Nathan Eovaldi, you have Nick Pivetta, and the back in the rotation, which I thought might be a little on the iffy side, has been pretty solid. So you can hold up until you get Chris Sale and James Paxton back. There's more reinforcements to your starting rotation. And then you can kind of flip-flop things around in the bullpen and then obviously go make trades. So I think you're back into where you can start to feel better about this team. You can start to feel better. You don't have to be panicking anymore at this time. So I think you're in a good spot when it comes to this Red Sox team. And they're fun to watch. Trust me. Going down to Fenway Park last Saturday for my birthday for that game, they obviously we all know they came back from 5-0. I ended up winning the game 6-5. Rafael Devers hit one of the hardest hit balls I've ever seen on that first home run to right center field. It was absolutely annihilated. Hit another bomb to left field, and Franchi Cordero was showing up. And then Matt Barnes was able to nail it down. And the atmosphere was just great at the ballpark there. It was just so nice to be at Fenway when they were winning and being in a close game. And I thought that I had a chance to be there for my first ever walk-off Red Sox game. I missed it by a day. But it was just so exciting to be there. And so the energy back at Fenway is what I'm trying to get at there is I can personally attest to it. All the energy's back. So it'll be nice to see what the Red Sox have going for them here now. Now, of course, we will keep you all updated on what's going to be happening with the Celtics team, with the Boston Celtics, as they get ready for Game 6 tomorrow night. Hopefully, they can clinch it, and we'll keep you up to date if they clinch and who they might play in the finals if that does happen. Obviously, we'll keep you up to date on what's going on with the Red Sox and how things are going to be looking for them, and if they can get back to 500 and hopefully maybe by next week when we talk to you, maybe they might be over 500. We'll see what happens with the Boston Red Sox. And of course, if we get any NFL news as far as with the Patriots or any news coming out of mini camps here or anything else, and of course, any offseason news with the Bruins or anywhere else around the Boston sports world, we will let you know what is happening in the neck of the woods up here in New England. But until then, as always, I've been Sean Metcalf, and you can always like and subscribe to the show on YouTube. Hit the bell for any notifications as well. And of course, follow the show on Spotify or on SoundCloud. On the podcast version, just search for New England Sports Weekly and you'll find us there. And then, of course, you can follow me on my socials at Sean_Met28. And that's on Twitter and Instagram. So send me any tweets or any messages there as well. Or, of course, you can follow the show directly at NE Sports Weekly and send me any comments there. And obviously, if you want to watch the live stream, it's usually every Wednesday night, unless obviously there's a Celtics playoff game or something going on that we have to move it for. Then we'll keep you updated on that. But until then, until next week, have yourself a good one, folks.